Sahana vavatu, sahano bhunaktu, sahaviryang karavavahe, tejasvina vadhitamastu, ma vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May we be nurtured together. May we be nourished together. May we strive together. May our learning shine today. May we not quarrel. Summary last week. The title of chapter 12 is Bhakti Yoga. The topic of devotion. So before going further, let's revise. What is devotion? What is this word bhakti? And in 12.2, verse 2, Krishna said, Mayi aveshya manaha. So in me, the mind abides. In me, the mind is focused. So let's bring this question. What do you mean? How do you grasp this? In me, the mind is focused. In me, the mind abides. What does this mean? I would like to open up a conversation to empower you to some ideas. How do you abide your mind in me, in the Lord? What does this imply?
One way is to repeat the name. It's the simplest way, I guess.
Yeah, excellent. So this is Japa, one of the ways. And what would be the intention? What is the mechanics that goes on behind repeating something?
Practice of it.
Yeah.
So you unnecessary chatting, in the mind, that stops.
Yeah, good. So the mind's always going through chatter, and you're simply adding, or you're complementing it with a different kind of chatter, and that is called Japa. That means the name of the Lord, which represents, at least symbolizes for you, something that it is divine. It's kind of like chanting the Australian flag or the Indian flag. Now, it's a small flag, isn't it? And yet in that flag, the entire country is symbolized. So in that same way, the person chants a japa, as Pavan was saying, and that name, which represents divinity, the entire sphere of divine, you chant, and thus it reiterates, it reminds you of the presence of the One. Okay. What else could this mean? Mayi aveshya manaha. In me, the mind abides. Abide in me.
It could mean that aligning our actions to the law of the universe or Lord, or in other words, practicing the knowledge that we have gained through shastras.
Brilliant. So what Meena was bringing up was we can divide our existence into three spheres, and that is our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Now, entire life is these three spheres. And we can say now, which of these three spheres can I now align, as Meena was using that word, in the name of dharma? So this means I have to discover what are the principles which sustain me in response to the environment. And this is called dharma. So this means one thing or another thing you do every day that it may be something that is not pleasant, and yet nevertheless it is something that represents divinity. For example, suppose that often you just say hello and you stop there, like, hello, how's it going? But this time you just, pause, like, hey, I'm gonna look into you a little bit for a while, just 2 seconds longer, just acknowledge you as a human being. So this, when we say namaste, in other words, I recognize the divinity in you, that very essence is also in me. So this means it may not be pleasant or convenient, and yet you still get your actions, one of those spheres, to align with those dharmic principles. And this, through the course of time, you say, what's the purpose? It also spills in everything else. It also spills with your employees. That means you start to address and communicate more efficiently with your employees. That means you start to be with them. That means you're present with the person. And when you're present with the person, is it not true they like you? Is it not true they're willing to pay more attention to you? Yes. So this means something as unrelatable as simply taking a moment longer to address one person also has a benefit across all areas in your life. Okay. What else could mayi aveshya manaha? How else is this mind of ours supposed to abide in him?
And developing prasad buddhi.
Super. So this is similar to, this is more active approach than japa, because japa requires me an isolated time to devote and say the name of the Lord. Whereas Ishvara Prasada Buddhi is a mind that is accustomed to acknowledging the presence of the different variables that accounted for the presence of this object or this person that I find myself interacting with. So this means you can, in that moment, take into account so many variables that took place in the background, both unknown and known, that produce this situation. And then that automatically, just like japa, draws your mind to divinity. And through the course of time, as I said with japa, it reminds you of the presence. So this means it makes the mind more often abiding in me, in the Lord. Okay, anything else? How else do we, let's look at it from a different standpoint. What if we turn this me into the word atma? In this case, atma would stand for consciousness, formless consciousness, Brahman. So now let's re-ask this question. How does this mind abide in atma? The mind is?
It's lit up, it's illuminated by atma.
Yeah, super. So this means through the very understanding that all of my thoughts only take place in the presence of consciousness, in the presence of atma. So this means this is even one step higher than japa and then one step higher than Ishvara Prasada Buddhi, because you don't have to take a specific moment to engage your intellect, but through the course of understanding, when are you not away from your own thoughts? This means whenever a thought about anything comes, simple reminder that it is alone illumined by atma. Okay. So I'll give you my take on this. Mayi aveshya manaha. This is from a practical standpoint. We don't have to go into atma yet. We will do in verse 3. Just recently, I was reading online that when people have dash cams on their car, it makes you more alert. It makes you more conscious of your driving. You're less likely to engage in foolish driving skills. It's an interesting fact. Now, why is this? Why is it that when we're recorded, when we know we're on camera, that we're being watched, why is it that we automatically consider our actions in the future? Why do we consider, it makes us consider our present actions and the kind of consequences they're going to have in the future when we know that we're in the presence of something that is watching us? Why is this?
The fear of repercussion.
Fear of repercussion. So one of them could be the fear, but also if you look at your own, your behavior, you will see that, okay, automatically, just by being watched, it makes you more alert, more deliberate in every action that you do. So now tying this with mayi aveshya manaha, it is as though the presence of Ishvara is always watching. As Nagesh was beautifully saying, the illuminator, which is not separate from Ishvara, is always present. So when am I not being watched? So this means that every action that a person does, it indeed has some consequence in the future, which you will either reap the rewards or you will suffer the consequences. So by reminding oneself through japa, Ishvara Prasada Buddhi, and through the illuminating principle of the mind, this alone also contributes to reminding myself of the presence. And this automatically translates into real life actions that are more responsible and, as Mina was saying, more in coherence with the nature of harmony called dharma. For example, if you take water inside a bowl like a square bowl. Now, what happens if you tilt the bowl? What happens to the water? Does the water tilt with the bowl, or it stays at level? The water stays at level. So this level, called horizontal, is what we could call the dharma of the water. In other words, the water will do everything possible to level itself back to its original default level, called dharma. In fact, whatever agitations the water goes through, suppose you shake the bowl, all of those agitations and shaking of the water is only in the name of what? Coming back to its dharmic state of level. That means it's equalizing itself back to its original condition. So in that same way, we can now equate this to the person. We can say that the proportion to which you are not seeking dharma, harmony with the environment, is the direct proportion to which your likes and dislikes, your personal biases, are overshadowing this principle of dharma. For example, we've seen at the Capitol Hill recently, it's very easy to go and attack and, engage in barbaric behavior and uncivilized behavior by breaking the tradition and insulting the long tradition of presidents that took place. It's very easy to do that. Why? Why does that happen in the first place? Because the person's like and dislike for one person and dislike for another person causes them to overshadow what we call harmony with the environment. Thus, you have these irrational responses that are going on in the media. So this means the proportion to which I am not seeking my level of dharma, that means equilibrium with the environment, is a direct proportion to which your likes and dislikes are dominating. Therefore, what happens? The mind ends up hankering, wandering in external objects, looking for a savior out there, producing activity in the world, creating noise. Why? Because the mind is driven by likes and dislikes. So the question now is, how do you manage likes and dislikes? The first thing that you can do is, as we said last time, you can first look into the nature of that which you have a like or dislike into. Why does a like or a dislike persist? Because we look at it only at a shallow level. We never looked into its real worthiness. What is it about this that attracts me in the first place? Or what is it about this that I don't like in the first place? When you take at least a minute or two to look deeper into this object of like or dislike, then the entire value towards it modifies in that moment. The second thing that we can do is realize that this object to which I have a like for, the liking towards it, the happiness that we get, is not in the object itself. Because if it was, then every single person in this world would have the same kind of response towards that same object. But that is not true. Only one particular person has. So this means what? I have personally given it value according to what it's supposed to mean. But is it the fact objectively? No. Therefore, it is a subjective fact that I have created through my own deliberate or undeliberate associations. So this means whatever you create, you can equally undo. So this means whatever there's a like or dislike, pulling my mind out there, creating more noise, less time for knowledge, I can equally, through my free will, undo those strong bonds that cause the mind to go outside. What else does this mean? It means that when the mind constantly trains itself to seek happiness in an object, what happens? What is the consequence of that? It starts to see that all happiness belongs to objects. It means it starts to address atma less. But what is the true source of happiness? You, atma. Therefore, the more I look outside and look for objects to make me happy, the less I acknowledge the inexhaustible source of fulfillment, which is the very I am, called Atma. So this means we have to come to a certain point and reverse, undo this cycle. And that involves looking into the nature of the object and realizing whatever happiness I give it actually comes from myself, comes from within me. And every time you break this cycle, you're actually conditioning your mind to withdraw, to draw fulfillment, happiness from yourself. And tell me this, when are you not available to yourself? Never. Whereas the object is subject to coming and going. If it's there, you hug it. If it's not there, then you're denied the hug. Therefore, you're denied the happiness. Whereas if you just for a moment, you can still hug, no problem. But if you realize, okay, so this happiness that I feel for this person, that I have for this object, actually comes from within me. That in itself trains your mind to keep on drawing this limitless happiness, this fulfillment from Atma, whose nature is Ananda. Okay, so the original question was, what is devotion? The second part, which Krishna stated in verse 2, was paraya shraddhaya. So what is this? It means unflinching, unshakable faith in the authority of the Shruti Pramana. Shruti Pramana means the means of knowledge contained within the Shruti, in other words, the Shastra. Unshakable faith in the Acharya, and most importantly, unshakable faith in yourself. What good is the Shruti Pramana and the Acharya if the listener doesn't have confidence in themselves? This is why one of the most important qualifications or useful qualifications for a student, for a listener, is that they have done something successful in their life. Because suppose someone that being offered things on a silver platter, they never really took time to accomplish anything themselves. So they don't really know their capacities for accomplishment. And now they come to Vedanta and we say, this requires lots of inquiry. You need to still your mind. You need to simplify your life. You need to, put things, reduce the intensity to which you get involved into things, because all of these things create noisiness in the mind. And the person's like, oh, this is too much for me. Whereas if you have done something in your life, or some business or some accomplishment or some sport or some dance or some achievement, then through that alone, you can draw confidence that you can indeed succeed in things in life. Therefore, you take that confidence into Vedanta. This is why Shraddha is most important on part of the listener. Because what does Vedanta say? You're listening to this because there is a final reality. And this final reality, I am. And I need to understand that. And that understanding requires effort. So effort, you need to be comfortable with. Yes, I have indeed applied a lot of effort in my life, and I can use that equal amount of effort in Vedanta. So this means there's no correlation, there's no difference. The effort you apply in Vedanta is the same effort you apply in your job, in your career, in your business. Okay, now in chapter 12, Arjuna asks which is most superior. That means which is most efficient and effective for attaining the ultimate goal. You remember this, right? Okay. And the two options were Saguna Bhakti and Nirguna Bhakti. Now, what is Saguna Bhakti? This is whereby the mind or the senses, so this mind is internal, senses is external, both of them hold onto something with form, something with attributes that represents divinity. Just like holding onto a flag that represents the entire country, in that same way the person can hold on to remembrance like Japa, can hold on to meditation like focusing on one thing, can hold on to service through karma yoga, can hold on to rituals. All of these things the person holds on to, whether physical or mental, that represents Ishvara with attributes. And all of these methods, they produce what's called punya karma. Now, when you do these methods, you produce punya karma. And this punya karma obliges Bhagavan's order to pull the devotee out of ocean of samsara. This will be mentioned in verse 7 of chapter 12. For example, in the Bhagavatam, there's a story of whereby Krishna answered the frantic call of Rukmini, and she was about to be married by force to a cruel fella called Shishupala. Have you heard this story? I think also in the Mahabharata it was there. So she was calling Krishna, please save me, please save me. And she was sincere in her call to be rescued from this man. And what happened? Krishna came just in time to save her. So this means if a person is sincere and they really mean it, then indeed this punya karma will be shown what's called adrishta palam. That means it is unseen consequence, and when you ask, it comes. And then you cannot trace it to what action it comes from, and yet nevertheless, whether it is drishta or adrishta palam, seen or unseen consequence, it still comes from your Saguna bhakti. Another nice story is Gajendra, which was the elephant king. So it's an elephant, and he was walking with his pride of elephants. He had two beautiful long white tusks and a long trunk, and a little, king's golden hat on top. His name is Gajendra. So the elephants were walking on a very scorchy day. It was hot, and the sun was shining, and they needed water desperately. So they need to change their plans. They said, we need to find water, otherwise we will die. So they started walking, and they saw in the distance a beautiful pond of fresh water with petals of lily of flowers. And so Gajendra, being the king, he had the first privilege to walk over cheerfully into this pond, which, by the way, represents samsara. Because what is a pond? That which gives you joy, that which you find so alluring and tempting to go in and splash the water and just take comfort in. So Gajendra, not noticing the selfish alligator that was hiding in there, who was preventing anyone from coming, he was playing in this water, splashing the water, and as these fellas, his other elephants were watching on the side, because the elephant gets first chance. And then what happens? The alligator, the jaws of the crocodile, it was a crocodile, clasp onto the foot of the elephant. So what does this represent? The jaws of the crocodile, of the alligator. Attachment. Once you are inside the ocean of samsara, then it is one attachment after the other. And how much does the alligator listen when you say, please release yourself? Not very much. In other words, attachment is very, very strong. Once it grabs on, it is very hard to shake off. So Gajendra was, with all of his might, he was fighting for some hours, trying to shake this alligator off, and nothing happened. So finally, when nothing worked, and the other elephants were obviously afraid to join in and to save him. So when nothing else worked, what happened? Gajendra resorted to the last resort, and that is he called Vishnu. And so Vishnu was coming from Vaikuntha. And what did Gajendra say? Please pull me out of this pond, this river. Pull me out of this river of samsara. And what did Gajendra say? Did he say, please release me from this alligator? No, he was wiser than that, because he knows if he's to be released from the alligator, what's going to happen? Another alligator is waiting, right? So his thinking was much wider. He said, please release me from the grip of Maya. Because he noticed that the problem wasn't just immediate, the problem is ongoing. And therefore, his wish was indeed fulfilled. And so the Lord helped him by giving him knowledge and releasing him from the spell of Maya. And thus the alligator released. So these are very nice stories from the Bhagavatam, and you can draw a lot of symbolism in them. How, once the person is caught, they need help from either the acharya, from the shastra, or just what's called Ishwara Anugraha, that means Ishwara's grace. So that was Saguna Bhakti. Now Nirguna Bhakti. Now in Saguna Bhakti, if the Bhakta relates to Ishwara as either a friend, a master, a child, a dear close associate, then how does a Bhakta refer or relate to Ishwara in Nirguna Bhakti? As
Atman?
Yeah, as my very own
Himself,
self. Yeah, not a matter of Ishwara, I'm relating to Ishwara over there, but I'm relating, there's no difference, real difference between me and Ishwara. While at the same time honoring the apparent limitations of the person. This means the person doesn't put themselves above Ishwara and say, I'm bigger than this world, but addresses the fact that, yes, there is an apparent person here with a certain limitation, and at least until the person is alive, but at the same time relates to Ishvara as one's very own self right now. So Arjuna having asked which is superior, Krishna was then obligated to answer. And Krishna said there is no choice between the two paths. You must go through them in grading. Just like going through kindergarten qualifies the mind for high school expands the mind further to capture more sophisticated teachings in university. In that same way, Saguna Bhakti needs to be undergone so that the person can be qualified for Nirguna Bhakti. Otherwise, the mind is going to be switching back and forth, and that is going to waste time of the Bhakta. They're going to get discouraged. Now, in verse 3 to 5, which we will do, Krishna starts with the highest sadhana. Remember those 5, the rung of 5 sadhanas? The highest one was Jnana Yoga. So Krishna starts verse 3 to 5 with Jnana Yoga. And what does Jnana Yoga involve again? It involves 3 stages. First is Shravanam. Shravanam just means I am gaining knowledge in a systematic, consecutive fashion through Pramana, through a means of knowledge, which is further guided by the Acharya. So just a simple life, simple real life. Suppose that you go to mathematics and you know nothing about mathematics. Are you going to learn first about multiplication, division, or first you're going to learn addition and subtraction? You know the answer, right? First addition and subtraction. Now, why not multiplication and division first? Because they require, right, the basic foundation of addition and subtraction. Okay, so this means it is systematic, it is orderly. Not only that, but you seek a mathematics teacher. If you like him or her, that's even better. If not, sometimes in school, you just have to get through the whole process, right? So this means step 1, I am gaining knowledge in a systematic fashion, how to calculate and subtract, and thus also multiply and divide. Now, suppose you walk out with that knowledge, and now you're supposedly a qualified mathematician. Does that guarantee that you will automatically go inside the store to buy your groceries and start adding numbers inside your head? No. You will still resort to what? Your old habits of pulling out the calculator, right? But not only that, you may mix. You may use a little bit of heads, a little thinking, and then check it up with your calculator. So this means even after I acquire the knowledge of mathematics, I am still not, it doesn't mean that I am spontaneously, automatically using it without any effort. So therefore, what is mananam? Mananam is whereby you convert shravanam, this gained knowledge, into conviction. What is conviction? This means you are so confident that you are self-convinced owing to your repetitive practice of the knowledge gained in Shravanam. What does this mean, Mananam? It just means I'm building 100% unshakable confidence in those thoughts which contradict the teaching gained in Shravanam. What happens is old habits will still pop up and you'll say, I don't quite see how this fits with what I'm taught, what I've been taught in the shastra. Therefore, you take your time, your energy and effort, thought by thought, addressing them, which do not give you 100% confidence. After this, not there is an after because it's a continuation, there is a stage of Nidithyasana. What is Nidithyasana? It means that even after there is 100% confidence in this knowledge, then you're clear. In fact, every time you hear it, it's like, yeah, okay, good, I'm clear. Thank you for this knowledge. It doesn't still mean that you will enjoy the full benefit of this knowledge. A dancer, for example, a dancer dancing on the stage, but what's the difference between two kind of dancers? Dancer A is sort of just doing it mechanically, and they're good. And dancer B is equally good, and they are having fun. What's the difference?
The second one's a simulator that's got more passion.
Yeah, okay. So obviously something is going on in their mind. That means they're more freer in themselves. They're more free in relation to themselves, but also more expressive. Now, what makes a person more expressive, more joyful, more free to be what they have assimilated in Mananam and also learned in Shravanam?
When you're immersed in it,
Immersed in it, yeah. And how do you get immersed in things?
you're devoted to it.
Okay, devoted. We spoke what devotion is. Good.
No, practicing a lot.
Practicing a lot, yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Trusting yourself.
Trusting yourself.
There's no doubts.
Okay. What about time? Does it not take a lot of time to immerse oneself, as Rani was saying? And that time, this means I make my life about that very thing. This means the person is so immersed that they almost fade out everything else. Not that they start ignoring everything else, but they're just so confident in their knowledge that it is firm. And that firmness itself translates to joy, translates to happiness. So therefore, Nidithyasana is continuing to address your relative self. Back to the self-help section of the library, back to learning about your inner psychology, your emotions, how to manage your life, how to generally live a more cheerful, be a more cheerful person. Why is Nidithyasana important? I'll give you a simple analogy. Suppose that I give you a mirror and the mirror has some blemishes on it. It's not a big deal. It's got a few blemishes here and there. And you take this mirror outside on the sun. Would the mirror reflect the sun? Absolutely, because it's a decently clean mirror. But what's going to make the mirror reflect more of the sun? Yeah, polishing the mirror completely. Now, suppose that you don't have the right detergent, the right ingredients. It's going to take you a long time to polish the mirror, is it not? Yeah, suppose you're in the wild or something, so you need to find, and you don't want to scratch the mirror, you don't want to damage your mind, right? So you want to do it carefully. So in that same way, a pure mind that has fully assimilated this knowledge through process of Shravanam and Mananam is reflecting the light of consciousness called Atma, no doubt. And this light of consciousness is joy itself. However, owing to the old conditions that we've carried on from childhood, from those very hard, deep ingrained notions, they still contaminate the mind and they still stay as little blobs. So Nidithyasana is simply going back to the relative person, to the relative I am, and clearing up those blobs through different modalities. And there are many modalities. You can do NLP, you can do Gestalt therapy, you can do just general, reassessing your situation, going back through memory and then looking in a different standpoint. So there's many things you can do in Nidithyasana. So Nidithyasana thus is a lifelong process. So there's no such thing as, okay, now I'm final, give me a certificate, I'm done. And since Jnana Yoga is also a form of bhakti, what is bhakti? It is devotion. Now, is it not true that in any kind of devotion, you offer something? Like with Saguna bhakti, you offer your time, energy, and effort. And what could you be offering in Jnana Yoga, Nirguna bhakti?
Are you surrendering the personality?
Okay. So the other way, okay.
Attention?
Absolutely. Attention is also part of surrendering your personality. Specifically, you're offering, in Vedanta, we say, your ignorance. You're surrendering your ignorance, as Nagesh was saying, into the fire of self-knowledge. So, and that self-knowledge comes through your continued practice of Nidithyasana. This is why the person doesn't stop. They don't say, okay, now I'm done, I'm clear, put the books away, go back into the world. It's not like that. The person has a genuine interest to continue expanding, to be the best they can, even if it's a relative person. You can't help it because you still love that relative person. So that was the summary. Now let's go into verse 3. Ye tvaksharam anirdeshyam avyaktam paryupasate sarvatra gamachintyam cha kutastham achalam dhruvam sanniyam yendriya gramam sarvatra samabuddhayaha te prapnuvanti mam eva sarvabhuta hiterataha.
However, those who contemplate upon that which is not subject to decline, indefinable, not available for objectification, all-pervasive, not an object of thought, which abides in Maya, does not move, and is eternal. Those who have complete mastery over the group of sense organs, who are always equal-minded and take delight in the welfare of all beings, gain me. Alternative meaning: having complete mastery over the group of sense organs, only those who are always equal-minded and take delight in are disposed to the welfare of all beings, gain me.
Now pause and go down to page 133. Continue reading.
Arjuna's question was, which of the two groups was better? Those doing karma yoga and meditating upon Saguna Brahman for the sake of moksha, or the sannyasis committed to the pursuit of Nirguna Parabrahma? Who is nearer to moksha? Lord Krishna said, those who are meditating upon Saguna Brahma are living a life of karma yoga, yoga vitamaha. Here he shows that the sannyasis are not available for such a comparison. You cannot compare someone who is the end itself. Those who are capable of Aksara Brahma Upasana are not ordinary people. They have accomplished what these others are trying to achieve.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Here Krishna says, the others, that means the Nirguna Bhaktas, follow Nyana Yoga, contemplating on Nirguna Brahman by the process of Shravanam, Mananam, Nidithyasana. Then Krishna describes Brahman using technical words. And we will go through all of these words now. So when I say Brahman, I'm talking about consciousness or awareness. This is the final reality that we're talking about now. So what is this final reality? First word he says is avyakta. So this means Brahman, the final reality, is not perceptible to any of the 5 sense organs, nor to the mind. What are the 5 sense organs? Like, it cannot be seen, it cannot be heard, it cannot be felt, it cannot be tasted, nor through the mind. Now, before talking about both, let me give you nice categories of both of them. There are 2 kinds of perceptions. There is gross perception and there is subtle perception. Gross perception is whereby, for example, you touch something now and you feel it. So you say, okay, so I feel smoothness or roughness or hardness or sharpness. Or, I see color or form or shape or size. So this means all of these things which are observed involve the eyes to be open, the ears to be working, skin to be functioning, tongue to be functional, and all of the other senses to be working as they should. 5 in total. And then the other category is subtle perception. This is in regards to the mind. For example, memories. Does your memory have weight to it? Can you put your memory on a weight and go, okay, 0.001 grams? No. So when we say subtle, it is that which does not have mass nor weight. For example, your thoughts do not have mass. And even if you see the brain activity, the brain is going to light up. You say, well, see, there is some activity. But that is pertaining to what? The physical brain, the annamaya kosha, the stula sharira, the physical body. You cannot see okay, so there's a car there, it's red color, and the person's going inside the car, and all of those other little memories. It's not going to be seen in brain activity. So this means when we talk about memories, pain, pleasure, can you measure pain? Can you put pain on a scale or give it weight or mass? No. Emotions, closeness, you feel close to someone. Can you measure that? Can you put that on a scale? No. Injustice, that's another emotion. Thoughts, intuition, all of these perceptions belong to the order of category called your mind. The sukshma sharira in Sanskrit, in other language called the antahkarana, your mind. So in both cases, you're able to pinpoint whether it is gross or subtle. You're able to pinpoint your memory, you're able to pinpoint your intuition, you're able to pinpoint an amazingly high state of an expanded awareness, as they call it, right? So you're able to pinpoint all of that. Why? Because it belongs either to the mind or to what the senses are perceiving. However, this is not possible with the word avyaktam. It is beyond both gross and it is beyond both subtle. Not that it's beyond, but it is the truth. It is the very content of what is being perceived. In other words, avyaktam, in other words, Brahman cannot be turned into an individual object of knowledge. For example, this is an object called bottle. You can see it, you can touch it, but also if I remove it, you still have a memory of it. It is still perceived through the mind. So this means in both cases, it is an object of knowledge. Whereas avyaktam means I cannot individuate Brahman into one particular object in the mind, as a feeling, as a thought, as an intuition, as a samadhi, as a nirvikalpa, or any of those other perceptible, subtler forms of what you would call extremely expanded state of mind. Then achintayam. Brahman cannot be conceived by thought. Why not? Because we just said, where does thought happen? In the antahkarana, in the mind. And it requires a time to it also. This means one moment you're eating, next moment you're having a thought. This means it wasn't there just a moment ago and now it is. So therefore, Brahman cannot be conceived by any thought, no matter how subtle that thought is, because it can be made into an object within the mind. Rather, how do we then understand Brahman? Brahman is the very content of every thought. Just like, for example, the content of every ornament thought is the one gold. In that same way, in the presence of I am, in the presence of my existence, the mind can conceive thoughts. So you say, well, where is Brahman? Everywhere. Is it in one particular thought? No. But it doesn't negate the fact that Brahman is also that. So this means even though Brahman is everything, you cannot individuate the final reality to any one particular object. Because then you're going to say, well, what about something else? So that is why we cannot put Brahman into any into a conceptual reality. So the question now is, if the final reality, which you are right now, if it cannot be thought of inside the antahkarana, the mind, then how am I supposed to know Brahman? How I, the mind, am supposed to know Brahman then?
Neti.
Okay, sure. So we've got negation, and the negation is a certain tool to arrive. Then, okay, then what is left? What is that which remains even throughout the entire negation? And then you come to the conclusion. Okay, so it must be the presence, which I am. But how else can the mind know Brahman? And what Vedanta says is as the most direct answer as the self-evident I am, self-evident existence. The I am who is never not present to my life. Are you ever not present to your life? No, you're always present to your life. Other people are not present in your life. When you go to sleep, they're not with you. If you go in the bathroom, partners go, let me come with you or something. But who's still in the bathroom? You are. So this means the one person that is always present is this self-evident existence I am, which is in another language called atma. From the standpoint of the person, from the standpoint of the macrocosmic, we call it Brahman. Either way, whether you're talking Atma or Brahman, it is still formless consciousness. So this means, since the self-evident existence, which you are, is always evident to you, I don't have to tell you that you exist. It means that you don't need any proof that you exist. Did you know that you exist, by the way? You say, I don't need to know that. I already know that I exist. Thank you very much. Let's change the topic. Let's talk about something more interesting. While every other object needs to become evident to you for its existence to be validated. See the difference? You alone don't need any proof that you exist, while every other object other than you, needs your presence for that object to become validated, and thus to say, yes, that object exists. Now, suppose some smart person says, actually, I do need proof that I exist. I don't believe I exist, because there are some people that will actually say this. What then can you say to them? So suppose someone says, I'm not quite sure that I'm evident to myself. What are you going to say to them?
Who's the one who's asking the question?
Okay, good. So what you can say to them is, okay, then to whom will the proof be offered? To whom will you go to validate that you exist? Because now suppose you go to some person that you think can validate your existence, and now suppose they say, yeah, you exist because you're talking to me, obviously. Is that going to change the person who's listening, who was there before and after? Is it going to make that person who was initially doubtful, is it going to make them now more existing? Because someone said, yeah, you exist. No. So this means whether someone tells me that I exist or whether someone doesn't tell me I exist, I equally know that I just exist. And I do so helplessly. I can't do anything about my existence. And what is Brahman? Sat Chit Ananda, which means existence itself. Therefore, you thus must be the very same final reality, because you don't have to do anything about the fact that you just exist. Yeah, sure, there are thoughts, there are emotions, there are memories, there are perceptions, but all of those only get their glory in the light of you, in the light of your existence. Therefore, that existence, in the presence of it, everything else thus gets illumined, gets shunned to be validated. So what does this mean? It means that Brahman is not an object of thought. It cannot be thought of, but rather understood as the very subject. The subject who is being mistaken for something else. That very subject that says, oh, I am other than Brahman, that very subject who is saying that is Brahman. And so what does the subject have to do? What does the person have to do? They have to simply own up to the fact that the very doubter is Brahman. Never mind the doubt, because the doubt is still a perception in the mind. But who's illuminating that perception? Your very helpless existence. And that existence is this final reality that we're speaking of. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that even though Brahman, which means consciousness, cannot be perceived by thought, as we just explained, the irony is only thought itself, which is opposed to ignorance, has the power to reveal Brahman. Because if you think about it, Brahman can't remove ignorance. Why not? Because Brahman, and okay, what is the logical flaw if you say that Brahman can remove ignorance? Suppose you say Brahman, the final reality can remove beginningless ignorance. What is the logical flaw with that?
That means it's got a beginning, but it doesn't have a beginning.
Okay, good. That's one way. Okay, what else?
Brahman cannot be a karta.
Excellent. Okay, so Kritika just said that Brahman has no power to do anything. Brahman simply illumines whether it is knowledge or whether it is ignorance. What's more, what I wanted to say really was, if Brahman could have removed ignorance, nobody would be ignorant, because everything is Brahman already. Therefore, the only principle in the universe that can remove ignorance is a thought that opposes my ignorance of myself as Brahman. And that opposing knowledge is what we call Nyana Yoga, which we are now studying in verse 3 and verse 4 and also verse 5. Okay, next term is anirdeshyam. It is not describable, this reality, by words, because Brahman is the very nature of all experiences, all objects, including the very I right now. To describe something is to give it a name. To give something a name implies it is a form that is within boundaries of time and space. Therefore, I cannot name Brahman because then I'm putting it into another name form. Then I have to address, what about these other names forms? Then the question now is, if Brahman cannot be described through words, then how does Shruti Pramana, that means the means of knowledge, what is Shruti Pramana? They're Shabda Pramana, that means they're a means of knowledge through words. Then how do they reveal Brahman, since they do it through words? And yet we just said that Brahman cannot be revealed through words. One of them is what we call implied meaning. Okay, what is implied meaning? Suppose your close associate or someone that you love says to you, you know, they walk into your garage and they say, you know, you need to make more space in your garage. Are they actually saying you need to go outside, put some space in a plastic bag and you need to like extract that space inside the garage? What are they saying? They're implying you need to organize your stuff, right? You need to put them into shelves. You need to, Aran is laughing, okay, I know why. You need to put things in a proper order, that as though gives more space. But are you actually giving more space in that garage? Are you actually making more space? No. The space before and after is exactly the same. The consciousness illumining the mind of ignorance and illumining the mind of knowledge is exactly the same. What is the only difference? I rearranged the stuff in my garage. I put things that were denying the reflection of the light of consciousness. Thus, I could not know myself. Thus, to organize one's life, one's mind, one's thoughts, thought by thought, as we discussed earlier, is thus to make as though more space in one's garage. But you're actually not making more space. You're just simply revealing what was already true all along. Because we already said Brahman is always true. It is always present. Now, what about in terms of the Mahavakya Tat Tvamasi? What if I say to you, Tat Tvamasi, you are that? What is the direct translation of this? Oh, okay, so I am that reality which is being talked about. So this means I, the one that's pointing, am not that. So I am that reality over there in the shastra that's being talked about. But what is the implied meaning of you are that?
I don't know, like you are the one that you are seeking.
Yeah, so you are you the seeker are the sought. In other words, I am that because of which this relative person is listening right now. I am that because of which this mind is processing these thoughts right now. Because if I wasn't existing, then who would be there to verify or to validate the emotions and the thoughts that are going on in the mind right now? Thus, I am that. But it's not like you're referring to that over there. You're actually, when you say that, what comes to mind? All of the knowledge in Shravanam and Mananam in that moment when you say that. What does this mean in reference to I, the one who wishes to know myself as the final reality? It means this. Because we said already, Brahman is everything. It means what? Brahman is everything in the past, in the present, and in the future. So this means in the stage of ignorance, whatever I was there has to be the same I that is true right now, even after knowledge takes place. Because how can you say Brahman was less in the past and now Brahman is more? So this means I in the stage of ignorance, thus has to be the exact I in the stage of knowledge. That's why when we say moksha, liberation, it just means I have removed ignorance that was denying me from knowing that I was already whole, full, and complete all along. Nothing changes with the person, exactly the same. So therefore, the I that is attaining right now has to own up to the final reality. When? Tomorrow? No, right now. Because we just said, Brahman is everything in the past, present, and the future. So what's the point of waiting tomorrow and going, oh, I wish I attained moksha somewhere tomorrow? It's an understanding that Brahman is always true. Therefore, how can I not be that right now? Now, suppose you don't understand this. What's going to happen then? Suppose you don't understand that you are Brahman right now. Then a spiritual marketplace gets opened. And this marketplace involves chasing lots of fancy, delicious experiences. So this means if I don't know this, then naturally the person is going to be seeking for experiences, thinking that Brahman is an experience to have or to add onto myself. Next word is Aksharam. This means this final reality never undergoes any changes in quality and quantity. Are you going to exist tomorrow more than you exist right now? You're going to exist equally tomorrow as you exist right now. Sure, there may be different feelings tomorrow, but they pertain to what? Your mind. But you, the presence, the existence will be exactly the same. It means that if I ever think that because now I'm more expanded, I'm having a much more expanded state of mind, does that mean I'm now Brahman? No, because we just said it is Aksharam. It never undergoes any change. So this means whatever I was yesterday is exactly what I am today. So this means whatever changes, whatever I think is now the final reality is not the final reality. Why? Because it has undergone through either a quantity increase, it's now more than yesterday, or it's a finer quality. So sometimes people say in the spiritual field, I feel more sensitive, just more kind of like open, more intuitive. All of these things are subject to quality and quantity changes. Therefore, it is not Brahman. Next word, Achalam. The final reality doesn't move. Why not?
Yeah, there is no space outside infinity to move.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Another way to say it is, someone else?
It's all pervading. It doesn't have legs.
Okay. If something is all pervading, where is the question of it moving from position A to position B? Because it is everywhere. Therefore, now look at this in the aspect of chasing for some, heaven. I want to go to a higher heaven. Wait a minute. The final reality is already right here, right now, pervading your very own body, mind this second. And that which obtains everywhere has no need to move. Thus, Brahman is Achalam. And also, why does it not need to move? Because whatever needs to move is a form. It means it doesn't occupy everything. So only a form with boundaries has a need to move from position A to position B. But since the final reality is everything, where is the question of movement? So this is why we say the final reality is pure stillness. It's complete, full, because there's no movement, there's no shakiness in that, there's no turbulence. And then sarvatragam, like space, the final reality again is all pervading. It means it obtains everywhere. This means you, from the standpoint of the absolute, you are everywhere. We're not talking about now your body, because your body, sure, there is, while the body is alive, sure, there is a localization to experience. But from the standpoint of the absolute, you are everywhere, everything. Now, if Brahman is everything, or everywhere all the time, then how do you explain the presence of objects going in and out of existence? Or should we say objects, now I see it, now I don't? What is that then? Because Brahman is everywhere. I'm supposed to see Brahman all the time.
Could it be they're just changing form?
Yeah, good. So in other words, they're going from manifest to unmanifest, but they haven't gotten out of existence. So this is why when we chant Poornamadav Poornamidam Poornat Purnamudachyate, all we're saying is that is the whole. In other words, Brahman is the whole, this is the whole, this Jagat is the whole. When you take away the whole from the whole, what remains? The whole. In other words, there's nowhere to go other than into the one existence. And also notice how what we're talking about is different than the Lord that we invoke through puja, through through our prayers, through our rituals, which is subject to arrival and departure. So this means only when I pray, only then I'm connected to the presence of the Lord. So notice how that is different than understanding that this final reality is never not present. It is always true right now. So this is why a jnani has no need to do these rituals and prayers, because the understanding is clear. And then Kutastham. This has two meanings. Firstly, Kutastham means free from modifications. What does this mean? All objects go through sixfold modifications in the entire universe. Wherever you look, whether under a microscope, telescope, with your eyes, or a sound or a taste, all of it goes through sixfold modifications. What are they? Existence obviously has to exist in potential. And what comes after existence? Birth. After birth, it goes through growth. And then it goes through maturity. And then it goes into decline. And then it goes into death. Take a seed, for example. The seed is not here. Does it mean it doesn't exist? No, it just means it is yet to be born. So it means it remains in existence, in potential. Then you see that first signs of seed, the cells start to multiply. That is called birth. And then the seed goes through a maturing process that is called growth. And then the seed starts to fructify into nice petals, which start to exude their aroma, their personality. That is called maturity, or undergoing change. And then what happens? Little by little, that flower is no longer as prominent as it once was. It starts to lose its sweetness, its fragrance. You look less at that little flower, now you start to look more at other flowers. Why? Because the flower is going through decay, and then it goes through death, only for a new seed to go through existence, birth, growth, maturity, decay, death. So this is an ongoing eternal cycle. Sixfold modifications is true for any form with a name. Whereas Kutastham is free from modifications, it is free of these sixfold modifications. So this means we're talking about the final reality, do not undergo nor existence, nor growth, nor maturity, nor all of the other steps. Yes, the physical body does. Now, let's apply a logic here. Suppose that you say that Brahman undergoes sixfold, remember what final everything, all that is. Suppose you say that Brahman does go through birth and then through growth. What will be the logical flaw with saying this? That the final reality does indeed go through, let's just stick with two stages, birth and growth.
Yeah, it is upadana karna and nimitta karna of everything. So, I mean, birth itself is like a contradiction of the definition. We can't use that, right?
It's limited if it's able to change or modify.
Yeah, okay. So this means if it's limited, then it can no longer host anything prior to its latest stage. So suppose its latest stage is now growth. Then can anything else in the universe undergo birth? No, because Brahman was birth and now the final reality is growth. So this means if the final reality changed, then there will be no such thing as birth in this universe. Nothing could ever be born again, which is a total contradiction because we constantly see things being born, coming and going. So this thus means the final substratum that everything else rests on has to thus logically be free of sixfold modifications. If it wasn't, then nothing could go through the sixfold modifications. The second definition of Kutastham is an anvil that is used by a blacksmith. What does an anvil do?
Oh, it flattens, provide a flat surface. You hit on it multiple times and it flattens the surface.
Okay.
Into something smooth.
Okay. Anvil strong. Yeah, anything else?
It changes the shape or, the shape of the object.
Good. So Ramita said, because of the presence of this anvil, the hot iron that the blacksmith strikes on with force, with power, the blacksmith is able to thus sculpt the rods through different shapes and sizes only because of the presence of the strong support called the anvil, which doesn't change even though these hard impacts are constantly causing the change of the object which they are impacting upon. So this means the anvil is in that same way equated to the final reality, which no matter how much hitting, no matter how much impact, how much changes are sculpted by this force of Maya through the three guna shakti, that reality itself stays completely intact. Thus, we have this anvil and blacksmith beautiful metaphor. So this means that for any change to take place, you need what? You need a changeless substratum. For example, the person, you, observes your own body-mind going through changes, no doubt. Now go back to the anvil example. Suppose you're watching a blacksmith and they're constantly hitting hard and sculpting this piece of iron on this changeless anvil. What does this mean? There's two components involved. One of them is undergoing change, but only because of the presence of the unchanging principle. In that same way, the person observes their life undergoing 6 changes in respect to the body and the mind, and yet something thus, by the mere virtue of observing, must survive the 6-fold modifications. And what is that? The very final reality, which is, as we discussed, changeless, and it doesn't modify in quantity nor quality. If it did modify in quality and quantity, then you have no reference to how much you are changing from yesterday, because yesterday everything was so much different than it is today, and you have a very clear perspective of what is what. Another way to explain it is, suppose there's an employer, and the employer is at a workplace and watches the morning employees coming and then going. And then that same employer watches the evening employees coming and going. And then what is the employer going to say? Since morning to evening, I saw morning employees and I saw evening employees. Why does the employer say that? Because the employer remains the witness to the changes of the employees in the morning and to the evening. If you change the employer, could such an observation be made? No. So this means you need the one witness in whose presence I can validate the morning and the evening. Just like when you wake up, you're constantly validating your mornings and your evenings day after day. Not only that, but you're validating what? You, the employer witness, are validating your various employee roles as a father, as a writer, as a singer, as an artist, as a cook, as a lover, as a sleeper, as a reader, constantly witnessing your little roles of employees. And that employer, thus, is this final reality. Okay, summary so far. Brahman is imperceptible, avyaktam, inconceivable, achintayam, indescribable, anirdeshyam. Now the question is going to come, how can the mind meditate upon this imperceptible, inconceivable, indescribable reality? Suppose it all just sounds kind of not quite sure. What Krishna states is one needs a prepared mind. Now, what is a prepared mind? Krishna now answers this in verse 4. Krishna here states 3 qualifications for the mind to be able to meditate or to discern this reality that we're speaking of. The first qualification, as Krishna says, is sanniyamya indriya gramam. Qualification 1 is dhamma. What is dhamma? It is the discipline of what information enters your 5 senses. For example, right now, you can put your entire body consciously in front of an action movie, with lots of scenes and nudity and violence. What's going to happen tomorrow? You're going to carry the trail of that movie that you watched today. And that trail tomorrow is going to not only stay there, but it's going to cause or direct the kind of thoughts that you have tomorrow. And that is enough to distract you onto a coherent path that resembles what you saw in the movies. Thus, the person already starts to get sidetracked by simply watching one simple movie. So this means by controlling or disciplining what I expose my eyes to consciously or my ears consciously, that in itself serves as a purifier of the mind. Because all of these senses, what you hear, what you see, the point is it is not just a matter of seeing it, it stays, and it stays sometimes for weeks, and that is enough to divert the person's attention elsewhere, thus make them less likely to study, to engage, to inquire. It is also Dhamma controlling your 5 organs of action. One of the most important one is, if you want to look at the most important, is your vak, your speech. Is it not true that speech alone has the power to unite or divide? Very much. You've seen it recently in the politics. So this means through the speech alone, the person becomes deliberate and intentional. If you're not sure, don't say it. Rather, listen, and then when you're absolutely sure, deliver your take on it. Because whatever you say, then you're also risking, if it's not checked up, the regret of saying, oh, I was wrong, you know, I didn't check up, I just kind of blurted for the sake of being included or not wanting to be look like an outsider in the group. Every time you make this compromise, it bites the person back. So this means the person becomes wise. And what is wisdom? Speak when you're absolutely sure that it is correct, it is verified, it is researched, and you have some authority on the basis of your time being spent in that subject area. What happens today? Most of the conversations are just blurting things out without actually verifying the strength or researching into the subject matter. So this means control the 5 organs of perception, but also to what your hands grasp onto, to what your speech, how your mouth opens, and so on. Qualification number 2 is sarvatra sama buddhayaha. This is, in one word, shama. So if Dhamma was external control, discipline, then shama has to be internal control. Now, shama is mastery over your emotions, your well-being. How well do you feel? How healthy do you feel throughout the day? Emotions are very subtle, and they come in a form of, you know, your moods, like your tempers, your patience, how positive and cheerful you are. So this means that the person needs to cultivate. The question is now, how do you cultivate positive emotions? By cultivating positive values, because your emotions are a reflection of what you value. If I value violence for the sake of maintaining order, then my emotion is going to be what? Anger, division, hatred, and so on. If I value harmony, because through harmony alone you can sustain and you can get to know you can relate with the person, then my emotion will resemble that very value. So this means the person has to develop positive values. Your question then will be, where do you find positive values? I said earlier, chapter 13 specifically talks about 20 values to cultivate for the rest of your life, which make the person a healthy human being. Also, it means to live a life of equanimity. What does this mean, to live a life of equanimity? Does this mean being equal to everything? Death, so what? Life, so what? No, what does equanimity mean?
Do not get too happy about good things. Do not feel bad about sad things. It remain balanced.
Okay, yeah. Nina?
I think it means not when there is no viksheep in your mind by the outward things, so you are firm in your knowledge and behave accordingly. That means, like whenever there's a happiness, happy moment, be happy, but you know that this is changing.
Okay.
Whenever there is a sad moment, be sad, but you should have that knowledge that it will also go away.
Okay, super, super.
So always have always be with the truth.
Yeah, okay, good. So in other words, don't get too carried away, also as Arun was saying, with positive or negative news, because hey, it's fleeting, it's passing, but it doesn't mean don't enjoy it while it's going on, because then life becomes dry and boring and not worthy of remembering in your last days. So this means there's a certain level of knowledge that is kept in and through these highs and lows throughout our life. And this knowledge, as we said at the beginning, Pawan was saying Japa, through reminders. That means engrossing oneself in this knowledge. Speaking of knowledge, how do you, for example, apply this right now? I actually want to show you a sample of what Meena is talking about. Now, when we communicate, now if you see these people at the bottom, they're saying yes, no. So this is what goes on in the conversation. One says yes, one says no. And they're finding themselves not quite agreeing, or sometimes agreeing, it doesn't matter. Now, all the person really knows is this known region, and this is called, SB just means subtle body, your mind. So whatever you talk about, you know immediately. So this means my immediate thoughts are present, therefore I express them. But what Meena is really saying is you're having a much larger awareness, alertness to what is really going on behind all of my words, behind all of my actions. For example, see this unknown region? So this is all that we don't know. So here you have CB, this means your causal body. This means the body of all of your vasanas and your samskaras. So this means whenever we speak, we're only aware of this, and yet we completely ignore the fact that our very own habits from lifetimes ago, or even in this lifetime, can be contributing and thus causing me to say no or causing you to say yes. So if I don't have knowledge of my causal body, then I fall for having a strong investment in either a yes or a no. Furthermore, we can go even one step behind. The causal body is further modified through the 3 gunas. So for example, if you're living in an environment that is more rajasic, more active, then that very raja guna is going to also modify the kind of output that your causal body is going to deliver to your subtle body, the mind. And that too is going to modify the kind of conversations that we have. So this is just one example, as Meena was showing us, and I'm glad she reminded me, otherwise I would have not shown this diagram. Okay, so that was the communication chart. That's what's going on in the background while you and I are speaking. Qualification number 3 is Sarva Bhuta Hite Rataha. This means commitment, or a person that is committed to the well-being of all creatures. In other words, the person is interested in advertising harmony, not only in their house, but also the moment they move out of their house. So this means the mind becomes sensitive to others' difficulties and pleasures. This is called a sensitive mind that is developed through refinement of your previous sadhana. This is why we, for example, have the final prayer, Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha. That means may no one suffer, may all be free from illness, and may all of us shine. So this means every time you offer your sensitivity and you express concern for other living creatures, you say, what's the benefit of this, right? Well, it trains your mind to become sensitive to your own inner feelings towards yourself. And that in itself, by becoming sensitive to other creatures, then that itself represents something that is closer to what you call dharma. And finally, what is the benefit of these 3 qualifications, which paved the way for Jnana Yoga? Krishna says, Te prapnuvanti mam eva. Such devotees surely attain me, and that is moksha. How? By having a sensitive mind, concern for the well-being of others, taking a moment to see they too are a living creature who are expressing pain and sorrow. They too know what it means to suffer, just like I do. So that connects you more to a human being, to another human being who is not apart from you. Shama and Dhamma. And this leads to success. Next week, we will close with verse 5, another important verse pertaining to Jnana Yoga. And then the question would then be, what if Jnana Yoga doesn't work? What if you don't relate to Jnana Yoga? What if you call this too intellectual, which is the most common complaint when we hear Jnana Yoga, which I've heard many times. I think any teacher has. And then we will go into Upasana level 4. And this we will discuss next week.
I couldn't understand what exactly Vedanta means by consciousness illuminating the thoughts.
Sure. Okay. Right now, you're inside the room. Why? Now look around, please, in your room. Just take a quick look. Okay. Why do you see those objects? Because of the presence of? Light. So this means those objects are there whether you see them or not. But it's only in the presence of light that it illumines those objects, which makes those transactions with those objects possible. In that same way, the one consciousness, the one light illumining all minds, because of its presence, Pavan's mind is illumined, and therefore Pavan is able to mention his thoughts, including the very doubt that you asked right now. And that very same consciousness is shining upon Andre's mind, and because of that presence, Andre is able to speak his own thoughts and feel his own emotions. So therefore, that one light illumines all.
The question I had in that analogy is, now here we have three entities. One, we have light, objects, and me, the self. Right? Light is illuminating the objects to the self, right? So there are three entities, but
no, two. So the light is the self. Light is Atma. So yes, Atma, the light, is illumining Pavan, the body, mind.
To whom?
To whom? To yourself. Because what is Brahman? Awareness. Okay. So in other words, who is the one that is capturing what is being reflected? That's what you want to ask. You are. Your existence, because we explained you exist. In the virtue, in the presence of your existence, everything becomes awared. Everything becomes illumined as a form of sensations in the body, as a form of emotions and even doubts in your own mind, which you're now asking, only because that one light, that one self is illumining your very mind right now.
Okay, but my confusion is still existing. So the consciousness is illumining the thoughts to me. That's what I always understand. But the consciousness and me are supposed to be the same thing, right? The Atman and Brahman is supposed to be the same. Mm-hmm. So if the Brahman is illuminating the thoughts to the Atman, that's where I'm confused.
Brahman is illuminating thoughts to the Atman. No, Brahman and Atman just means one same consciousness. So it's like this: consciousness from the standpoint of illumining one single individual's mind is called Atman. Consciousness illumining the entire universe is called Brahman. Either way, it is the same consciousness. So Atman and Brahman are just two words that we use, one to relate to the microcosmic, the Vyashti, one to refer to the Samashti, the macrocosmic.
No, but the sentence that you have used, Atman is illuminating the thoughts to you. But I mean, to me, Atman is something that is illuminating to me. So I still see three entities.
Now, in the presence...
Something, yeah.
In the presence...
So in the presence of Atman is seeing an object. That I'm not able to understand.
Yeah, in the presence of your existence, objects are validated. In the presence of the fact that I exist, you exist, yes, Pavan?
Yes.
If you didn't exist, then would this conversation be taking place?
No.
No. Why? Because you first need to exist, and in the presence of your existence, conversations, including this knowledge that's taking place now, is illumined.
I like the specific analogy that you mentioned, Andre, real quickly about the gold ornament. May be helpful for you, Pavan. It's be it a trinket, a earring, a special amulet, anything that you can call. At the end of the day, it's all the same gold.
In other words, good. In other words, who said that?
That's Ajay.
Ajay. Okay. In other words, everything is the one content, including Pavan's thoughts and mind, one content appearing as different multitudes, as duality, in a form of what you feel, in a form of what you see. But it's still the one content. So it's kind of like, actually, I don't want to explain it here. Please look at the video. And I use the also analogy of water and ocean. That's going to be helpful also. Om Poornamadav Poornamidam Poornat Poornamudachyate Poornasya Poornamadaya Poornameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.